All right, it's 7 o'clock, so we will begin. Today is the last day of our 3-day lecture, and since we have finished sort of going over all of the main content and what to remember, today Edward will be the main speaker, and he'll help you guys go over how to answer the exam questions. Take it away, Edward.
Yeah, all right. Hello, everyone. So the past 2 days, we spent all that time reviewing the content, and then now we need to do like the most important thing, right? We need to make sure that we understand how all of the content is related to each other. As I said yesterday, we need to understand like continuities and changes throughout time periods. So I think one thing that I could recommend is you just make a timeline from 1200 to now, and then you try to like jot in as many like key dates of like when you know things happen. You don't have to know the exact dates. Just make one of those to help you with studying, because that is a very important tool which will allow you to understand cause and effects, which is one of the most one of the most important things tested on the multiple choice section. So I'm sure you guys in your AP Road classes, you guys have done a lot of like tests about every unit, and I'm sure the multiple choice is a very big component of that, right? And so the multiple choice is actually the highest weighted part of your exam, although like it seems like sometimes in your classes you focus on the writing part, the multiple choice in the end is the most important part. And it is also very important, right? I have a few tips here. Make time management is very important. It is very important to start off strong, right? Because first of all, it's the first section of the exam for you guys. And then I know some of you guys are like freshmen, sophomores, like your first time doing an AP exam, so you don't really know what you're like in it for. So yeah, like 1 minute per question is typically the way. And I'm sure on your guys' tests, you guys have had many different like stimulus questions where you have to read like very long passages, and then you have to answer questions where you get more time for those. But the truth is the actual exam, right? There will be those like long questions, but I found out that I personally thought the exam was actually much easier than the practice ones that I did. So I think that's a very relieving thing for you guys to hear. I've been through that. I think Bakeland can back me up on that one. Yeah. And then so what you should do is prioritize like those questions that are that have like a primary source, right? And what that means is like it's like an image of something that happened. And then because those are much I feel like they're much easier to understand than reading over a very long text. So my biggest tip is if you know you'll have to spend more than 2 minutes on a question, I would highly recommend you just skip that question and then you can come back to it later when you have more time, because all the questions they all have that same weighting, right? If you get a very hard question correct and you get a more easier one correct, they will be counted for like the same weighting of the actual exam. So that's one thing you should keep in mind. All right. And then, yeah, I'm sure you guys have done like AP Classroom multiple choice questions, and then you've had texts that look something very long like this. I currently am in APUSH, and then this was from one of my practice ones that I found. And this is actually these two passages are from one question. So you can imagine how long it would take to sort of answer those questions. And I believe this is a prompt that is two parts, so it asks you to compare, and there will be a few of those on the actual exam. But yeah, and then I would highly recommend you prioritize questions sort of like these, right? I found this one also in one of my A push practices, and then this is like it's just a map with some keys, and then it is much easier to like understand and interpret, which allows you to answer questions much faster. All right. So when you have a writing thing, right, or a stimulus question, it will typically not be this long. And this is another question from my A push practice that I did. And I think this question is like would be like sort of like the average length of those writing ones, like maybe like a few short paragraphs, but it should be pretty like not necessarily that straightforward, but it'd be much easier to understand. and interpret in much less time. All right. And then now I will be teaching you guys like my approach of how I answer questions. So this question is actually from my A push practice, and this is actually like the process of how I'd answer these questions is very similar. So the first thing I would do is make sure you read like this part, the questions and the answer choices. Because so let's see what this question says. It says Douglas's rhetoric in the excerpt was most likely interpreted as promoting something, right? So we want to look for like key words in the question, right? And in this case, the question is promoting something. So then let's read the answer choices. Is it A, the need for more soldiers in the Union Army? B, his advocacy for African American rights, support for re-election, and criticism of limits on the emancipation. So when I read through this, right, I try to like think about, okay, these are the key things that I want to look for in the actual excerpt. So then when I actually start reading the excerpt, I know what to look for. And then another part that I feel like a lot of people overlook is reading like the author and the date, right? Because sometimes they take the author they use is someone like I believe Adam Smith. I've seen on an AP exam, we know he was capitalism. So you know that the question is likely going to be something about like the economics or like ideologies. And then yeah, so understanding that would be very helpful as well. So then let's read through this passage and look for keywords of what he's promoting, right? Let's see whether you are or not in touch. Okay, I'll just highlight the keywords that I see, right? You can see he talks about enlisting in the service of your country at this trial hour, which means that like at a very important hour to hold the national flag. And then here he says it again, right? Enlist and you make this your country in common with all of other men. And then again, I highlighted it here. He who fights the battles of America may claim America as his country. So I think when we read this, right, we can tell like enlisting means like enlisting in the army. So that's why we can easily figure out this one is A. So typically with these types of questions, the text will mention like the main points not once, but they should mention it a few times, right? Because if they have the answer in the text as just one word in like a big paragraph, that's gonna be very hard. So they will typically mention it a few times. Yeah. And then by reading the approach, by using this approach, we can figure out that the answer is A. So now I think I have around like 5 to 6 practice questions for you guys. This is just a short excerpt that I found, and then if you guys may type your answers in chat, please type it in. Okay, so I see a lot of people are typing B. Wait, what? The answer? Okay. So a lot of people seem to be typing B in the chat, and I think that is actually correct. So this is like, if you guys did my method where what you guys are doing is you read this first, like if you read this, right, you see Declaration of Rights and it's in the 1850s, 1848. So it's like mid 19th century. And we can tell that this is, and then once you read the answer choices, we can tell it's going to be something about like likely about like something like a reform, right, or change. And then, yeah, and then pretty much. So as we read through this, we can see that it says, all men are created equal. That is an Enlightenment idea. Inalienable rights, another Enlightenment idea. So all of you guys who said B, great job. What you got? Okay, it's fine. All right. So here's another question for you guys to try. It's the same like excerpt. It's fine. You can just let them type it. I think it'll be okay. Okay, so it looks like a lot of you guys are putting C. So would one of you guys be willing to like share why you put that? Democracy was not really a thing before. Yeah. Yeah, so I think this question is actually like pretty hard because when I did this, I was originally like thinking like D as well, right? Which is about equal gender, and we can see that. Wait, let me go back. We can see that the person talks about like men and women being created equal, right? So when I saw that, I thought of gender, but then as I like read through, it talked about how it was like we need to make change. And then, so in this type of question, like in most MCQ questions, there should be around like two answer choices, and then you are able to cross two of them out. So in this case, we can cancel out B, right? Because the diffusion of political ideas from Asia was like East Asia was like a very long time ago. And then also around this time, Asia was in like isolationist. Like China was like they did something like that. Japan was fully isolated. And then A, we can also cancel that one out because like yes, there's a push for the Enlightenment ideas, right? But it didn't come into fruition yet. So then that leaves us with C and D. And then this is like where the hard like why some of the questions may be hard and then since most of you guys said C, I'll trust that you guys all figured that one out. So yeah, let's move on to another one. This is a non-stimulus based question, and I personally think that these are harder because you have to make more inferences, and questions like these are the reason why like had knowing the knowledge, right? Had knowing like a timeline when like how certain things relate to each other is very important to understand. So just attempt this question real quick. Okay, so I see some of you guys have put in B as your answer choice. So would any of you guys like share in the chat why you guys think it's not, why you guys don't think it's something like A? Yeah, A is that is like sort of off topic, right? It doesn't really talk about why like how new like families like how stuff like that is related to capitalism. And then so I'll just do the next few ones. So D that is not that is like partially true, but the reason but we know the thing that we know about Western Europe, like back then, right, is that they had these like very massive colonial empires like across the world. And then as we and when we read the question, right, like it is important that we pay attention to just when it mentions like key vocab words, right, like capitalism, Western Europe. We know that started during like the around the Columbian Exchange era, and then what these European nations did was they ended up manufacturing goods and then they sold them to their colonies. So if you can understand that and then apply that, that is very helpful. All right. So now, yeah. All right. So now let's take a look at this question. Be sure to like make sure you're reading it correctly. So I see a lot of people instantly putting in D. That is indeed the correct answer, right? Because we know the Enlightenment ideas. are so okay, let's take a look at this even if we didn't know what the French Revolution and the American Revolution was, right? If we like let's say we had like no idea what it was. We see that they are both a revolution that involves a nation, right? And then in this question, it's talking about which one is not a result. So that means that we need to find which one is like the odd one out. And then if we see that there are two things about like a similar topic, we can most likely be able to cross the two things out of it. And then we like those of, and then since we know that the Enlightenment, it was like the idea that pe like individuality, natural rights, that led to the abolition of slavery. And then someone said in chat, the scientific revolution came before the Enlightenment. That is indeed correct. It was actually something that caused the Enlightenment ideas. All right. Now let's take a look at another question. Okay, so here's a case where I told you guys, if we don't know some of the answer choices, sometimes we like have to make a guess. So what do you guys think this one would be? Yeah, you guys can take your time to think about this one. Yeah. I see a lot of mixed answers, which I'm really excited about. So we've had some people say A, B, and C. So I'm sure some of the people said C because they saw someone else say it in the chat and then they felt motivated to say that. Yeah, the Anglo-Zulu War, that's a great question. I'm pretty sure it was a war between the English since like we know about like the Berlin Conference and how they wanted to carve up Africa. And then so that meant that all the Europeans had like their own like spheres of influence in Africa. The Zulu people, I forgot particularly which region they're from, but they were part of one of the areas that Britain was supposed to control. And then since they had all the technology, they started taking over them. And then yeah, okay, yeah, it's in yeah, okay, that rings a bell. It's in South Africa, and then it's pretty much like they rebelled against the British because they didn't want them like taking over their land. So I could understand why you guys might have thought it was that, but the answer is not okay. As the answer is not B either because we know the Opium War was between the British and China again, like the British involved again, where they wanted to like sort of dominate China economically. So that's not really like nationalism. I think that would be more imperialism related, and then nationalism would be the Napoleonic Wars. So for those who don't know, the Napoleonic Wars were wars fought where right after the French Revolution, where Napoleon sort of became like a not necessarily like a dictator, but he became a very like the main leader in France. And then what led to it was he was a very good military general, and then there was a lot of conflict in Europe, and then the what resulted was like the whole Europe had to team on him like 7 times to be able to defeat him, right? But what fueled the Napoleonic Wars was since Napoleon kept on winning, the French people kept on believing that they were like better and better, and they felt like it was like their duty to expand. Similar, yeah. So that is like nationalism. All right. And then this is another question that you're likely to see. I think we may have mentioned the Meiji Restoration, but which one is this like an impact question? Okay, I see there's a very a unanimous D. Everyone is putting that in. So yeah, the answer is indeed D. And then pretty much like if we don't know what the Meiji Restoration is, we can try to like the way to try to attempt to figure this out is look for a contrast, right? because typically we know there's going to be one that's very wrong and one that is like correct. So here we see like a contrast between C and D. We know the Western ideas was like industrialization, right? And then the option D is about increased industrialization. So C and D, they sort of like contradict. So if we understand that, we can likely just figure out in general like how we can that's how we can approach the question if we have no clue what the Meiji Restoration is. And then yeah. And then I think there's two more questions now. This one is one of the examples where there's two questions that are right, like more similar, and two that are like less. All right, so we have a lot of B's. I like to see that. A lot of you guys are getting it correct. So let's take a look at this one. So we know the World War One, right? Do we know what the main causes of World War One were? Someone put it in chat. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Maine, militarism, which was like the people then these countries like they developed new technologies, like new military equipment where they wanted to like sort of try them out. And then alliances, which is what this one is mainly about, right? And US put B, which is correct, multinational alliances that force nations to join even when their interests were like not at risk, right? So it's like when we think about it, like the assassination of the Archduke in Austria led to the Austrians declaring war on Serbia, and then that meant that Russia declared war on Austria, and then it's like a very complicated web, which led to like Germany and France all getting involved in a war because of like a regional conflict. So that is why that option is the best. And then let's just take a look at some of the other ones, right? Like A, the growth of land-based empires, that was like near like the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. That was the land-based empires grew around then, so it is not that. And then C, the spread of communism throughout Eastern Europe. That was not until the Cold War started after World War II, where the Soviets took over. And then D, an overall weakening of military power. That is not the case because there had not been a devastating war like World War One, which had weakened all the powers. All right. Yeah, now there's one more. Okay, this may be kind of hard to read because I stretched it a little bit. See some mixed answers. I like to see that. All right, okay. So I see seems like you guys have all came to an agreement that the answer is B and that is correct. So let's just take a moment to review like some of the other answer choices, right? Because if you don't really have uh like an understanding that is more than just like the surface level, it may be sort of hard like if you don't understand the effects of it. So I think the biggest trap for this one is falling for C. We see that it strengthened the relationship between America, the European ally. Wait, yeah, I think that one could be a trap because we know like the powers were involved and these were the people that set the treaty. Uh, But then we need to remember, we need to understand, right? We know fascism actually started in Italy, right? And then that led to like it's like ultra nationalism where they believe that they wanted to like, take over, and then that led to Italy and Japan actually, I mean Italy and Germany actually forming an alliance, which means that the answer is not that one. And then A, the we know it is likely not that, right? Because providing financial aid to Germany, that was just like the opposite of what happened. They put like 800 billion, I think is million or billion, 800 something in debt for the Germans because of war reparations. And then D is wrong. It is the wrong time period. If this question was about the conclusion of World War II, then D would be correct. All right. Yeah, okay. Here, okay, I think I accidentally showed the question. There, one more multiple choice just for extra practice. Okay, I'll give a hint. This was after World War One, right? And then it was after Russia fell and like the revolution in Russia occurred. Okay, so I see a lot of people are putting B, and then when I actually did this question first, I thought it would be B as well, right? But then apparently the answer actually is D because we know in many, okay, so and for those of you guys who might not know what the Spanish Civil War was, it was the nationalists versus the communists. And then the communists were supported by the Soviet Union. And then what they wanted to do was, so like one thing you guys should all know about the Soviet Union, like Russia at that time, was they just wanted to spread communism around the world, spread it to as many people. So the Spanish Civil War, which occurred, was fought between communists and nationalists, and the nationalists, led by Francisco Franco, were backed by both Italy and Germany, and then they ended up winning. And then it's like the same situation in Italy, right? There was fear of communism taking over that, so that is why Mussolini was able to like rally the people behind him. And I could understand why you guys may think was B, but there's the people of Spain and Italy, they were like I'd say they're more like homogenous than other areas like the Balkans, right? We know the Balkans, like Austria, like had a lot of like ethnic groups within. And then so that is I think that is this is a very hard question because the trap answer actually looks like a very good choice. Yeah. All right. So now, since we are done with the multiple choice section, I hope that helped you guys a little bit. The main takeaways I want you guys to have is there's typically two questions that are going to be more right or wrong. Make sure to read the answer choices first before the question, before the prompt, if there's a reading thing. And then now I'll move on to how to write a DBQ. So the DBQ is the F is an effort queue, and it is actually the most heavily weighted one at 25%. So what the DBQ is, for those who don't know already, I'm sure most of you guys know, it is you're given seven documents, and then you have to use these documents to support an argument, and which is like the prompt. And then the thing about the DBQ prompt is that it is going to be much more concise than the LEQ, right? So the LEQ may be something about like, oh yeah, what happened in like how did revolutions like affect so and so? But the DBQ may be specifically about like a specific revolution and it will provide you evidence for it. So the thing about the DBQ section is you will have 100 minutes to actually do the writing for the DBQ, and then you'll to do the writing for the DBQ and the LEQ. So you have to like split it in two, and there are many different ways that you can split the timing. The LEQ is a long essay question, which I will talk about after the DBQ. So what I would recommend you do first is you spend 20 minutes sort of like analyzing the DBQ and then like analyzing the documents and grouping them, and then you'll spend 40 minutes actually writing it. So let's say so. The first step I think is you need to understand what the prompt is actually asking for, because if you write it based off of like a wrong idea of what the prompt is looking for, then you'll pretty much get like not many points. So the most common prompt that I see is you need to evaluate the extent to which something led to like something else. So pretty much what this means, right, is evaluate like how significant was this specific thing in leading to another thing. And then another question that I think I've seen on one of my practices was like you compare and contrast one thing to another. I'm not sure if that can still happen, but I think that's possible. And then the last one is about continuity and change. I forgot to write it. I think those are all possible, but your most likely prompt is going to be evaluating the extent to which something happened. All right, so let's take a look at this prompt. Evaluate the extent to which ideologies impacted decolonization in Africa. The next few slides will be like all related to this prompt, so try to like keep this in mind. So what I would do first is try restating it in like your own words. What do you guys think this prompt means, like saying it in so you guys can understand it? Like reword this. Yeah, so my interpretation of how I would restate it is you don't have to actually like write down like you're restating, right? On the exam, you'll be given some scratch paper. So you can do it, but you if you just do it mentally in your head, it should work as well. And then the way I restate it is I'm like, what is the significance of ideologies in Africa after the era of colonialization? All right. And then, yeah, restating helps understand what the prompt is asking for. So now I'll be covering over like the main specific points of the DBQ. So if you look at the actual rubric, the first point is actually the thesis, but I think you guys should always start with the context, right? I would highly recommend that. So once you read the prompt, you could even do this like before you analyze the documents, but I think analyzing the documents first helps with context. You should spend 2 to 3 sentences talking about what happened before, which led to the event, right? And then make sure it is relevant to the prompt. So in my prompt, evaluate. Okay, so let's say we're gonna be playing a game of which you guys think is the better context for the prompt. Evaluate the extent to which ideologies impacted decolonization. I'll give you guys like some time to read these two prompts, and then I want you guys to tell me which one you guys think would be like the better response. So far, it looks like we have some diverse answers, which I really like to see. So this is actually, I'm sorry guys, this is honestly like a trick question. Both of these actually work as context. I think if I was a grader, I would give both of them the point for it. The context point is I personally think it is one of the easier points to get because you just need to talk about like background information, and then if you have a strong context that will also like lead into the thesis. Like I think context one would be stronger here because it talks about these few and then you can use them in the actual thesis. All right. So and then the next thing is the thesis point. The thesis point is relatively is also I think it's one of the easier points to get because all you have to do is make a claim about like what happened, right? So the format I would use is so I forgot to mention it here, right? I'd say the time period first. So I'd say in the time period circa something, and then my go-to is although A had an effect on the prompt, however, B and C were the most significant factors. And the reason why I like doing this, like you can do it in many other ways, is I like to set up a counterclaim because it adds more complexity to the argument. And then I think that's just like my go-to approach. So let's play another game this time, and there actually is going to be a correct answer this time. So okay, I forgot it should be thesis one and thesis two. Which one do you guys think would be the better thesis? Like which one makes a claim? All right, so I see a lot of you guys are saying one. That is correct. The thing is making a claim. It says the battle between capitalism and communism was the most significant factor, right? You're evaluating the significance of the prompt. And then two is simply just a statement, right? It's just a fact of what happened. This could be like, this could be better used as context. You're not like this one is not actually making a claim, a defensible claim about the prompt. All right, and then the next step I rec is to take time to read the documents and then make sure you understand what the documents are talking about. So what I learned from one of my classes was the SPY method. Have you guys heard of that one? All right. So the SPY method means is summarize the prompt. So like no summarize the document. Like what is the document saying? Like you don't have to write this down. I'd recommend you do though when you do your actual exam. And then P is prompt. Like how does the document connect to the prompt? Like how can you use it to formulate it back to the prompt? And then why? Why was it written? This part is it can help you with sourcing, which I will get more into detail to in a later slide. So yeah, I'd highly recommend you do this strategy with all the documents, and then I think 20 minutes should be like more than enough time to be able to do that. And then what I'd recommend you do is you also like group your documents, right? Like find similarities between the documents, a common theme. So in our prompt to evaluate the significance, like in the decolonization, that I could find documents about that talk about capitalism on post-colonial Africa, right? I could put that as one group. I can do another group about communism and then another group about Pan-Africanism. So I think being able to have the skill to understand what group documents are in is very important in writing a good DBQ. Yeah. And then the bulk of your DBQ is actually going to be like the evidence points. And this also comes to like around, it's slightly less than half of the points of the DBQ. So you need to use at least, if you want the 2 points, you need to use, do evidence and analysis for at least four of the documents. So the way I'd recommend you format the evidence is make it very clear for the graders when you are using evidence from the document and when you're studying a new piece. So the way I like to do it is this strategy. I say in document one, the document states, and then you like summarize what is in the document, and then you say this is very important because this caused, and then this is where your own analysis has to come in. You have to talk about why it is important, and then talk about how it leads to the prompt. And then one very important note for you guys is do not directly quote from the document. Like unless there are no like substitutes for the words. Like if it is a very specific word like imperialism, right? You can say that. But if the document, like in general, if you are able to summarize the document in your own word, that shows that you actually understand the document, and then that is how you actually want to approach it. The analysis, reasoning, and evidence, I see a question. The evidence, the analysis, and the reasoning should be around like, I'd recommend like one sentence each for those. And then also on the direct quotations, one of my classmates in a test we had, they used direct quotations on a test and their grade was, let's just say, went down a little bit. All right. Okay, so today, so I'll be walking you guys through how I would like sort of like spy a document or not or how I would phrase a document in my actual DBQ. So we can see this as so the way I phrase it is I say Document one is a map which shows the Soviet Union spreading communism to many new nations. This forced many African nations to choose between a side of the Cold War, leading to consequences if they didn't have any. So in this first part, I'm just talking about what is summarizing what is in the document. And then this next part, I'm talking about my analysis, right? It forced African nations to choose between a side. So that is how you guys will get the evidence slash analysis point. But the analysis point is actually like it's considered a different thing. It's kind of like confusing, but I'll get to it in a second. And then you also need to mention at least one specific outside evidence. So this is pretty much like as the name implies, evidence not found in the document. The way I recommend you format it is make it very clear that it is outside evidence. So say okay, I forgot to change it. It's on the slide. It should be, you should say one piece of outside evidence not mentioned in the document is so and so. And then you say this relates to the prompt because, and then your own analysis is going to be there. Yeah. So this is like my example. One piece of outside evidence not mentioned in the document is the development of the third world. This is a movement of many new nations to side with neutrality and form a new alliance based on not falling into the full influence of any of the big superpowers. So what I did here was I specifically mentioned it. I talked about the implications of it as well. Right. And then sourcing. I think this is actually a very, very important point, and you can get up to 3 points just from sourcing. So whenever you first hear about the word, right, it is often like very ambiguous what it actually means. So what it actually means is like you need to understand why the author like said what they said. Like, what is the purpose of the document, right? They're like, if it's an author with a speech, why did they say that? Did they want to persuade people about something, inform someone, build fear? Like the drawing, right? Is the drawing to build fear? Is it propaganda? And the most important part of sourcing is you understand who the author is and then how that may impact it. Yeah. So the way I do sourcing for this, right, you need to make it very clear. I say the author of this document is someone from part of the Committee of Un-American Activities. And then the purpose of this image is to raise fear of communism and to encourage African nations to not accept communism. So pretty much what I'm doing here is I'm talking about who the author is and then also the purpose of their image. And then I believe 2 days ago someone said they use like a hip method for sourcing. I'm not really sure what that is, but if that method works for you, you should just continue using that. And then lastly, there is the complexity point, the seventh point, the point that like not a lot of people are able to get because they don't really understand how it works. And I think there are two very easy ways to get the complexity point. They do not make it clear about how you can get it aside from here. You see, it says effectively use 7 documents or do 4 pieces of sourcing. And then I think that the 4 pieces of sourcing is actually the easiest because you're going to end up using 4 documents anyway. So that is, oh, hip, okay. So that is what I would recommend. Yeah. All right. And then you guys, this is how I would write my body. There are many other ways you guys can do it, right? So what I would do is paragraph one, I would do my context and my thesis. My paragraph two, I would try to aim for 3 evidence, ideally 2 from the documents, one outside evidence. And then paragraph three will be another body. And I try to like aim for paragraphs 3 and 4 are like my body paragraphs. And then paragraph five is going to be my conclusion, where I want to try to like restate the thesis because the I'm pretty sure the rubric of the DBQ mentions that if you either restate if the thesis is either in the introduction or the conclusion, then it counts, right? So let's say you forget it in your introduction, then you forget it in your introduction, you could then put it in your conclusion and it counts. And then a note here is if you can use all 7 documents, you should like go for it, but you're not required at all. They won't take points off for not being able to use all 7. Yeah, and like I just said before, the complexity point is very ambiguous. Like it's just like about writing a good essay, and the easiest way is to just use all seven of the documents or do sourcing four times. And then sourcing four times is, in my opinion, the best and the easiest way. All right, so now we are going to get into LEQs, right? So when you hear the name LEQ, long essay question, that I think it's sort of like misleading, right? Because they're actually not as long as the name implies. The formatting is much simpler than the DBQ, and that is why like the College Board recommends you spend less time on it. But the thing is, with like the in the 100 minutes you have, you can split the time however you want, right? So you can spend 70 minutes on the DBQ, 30 minutes on the LEQ, and there are many different ways you can do it. So the LEQ will have three different prompts primarily from three different time periods. And then your first possible prompts will be from the time periods 1250 to 1450 or 1250 to 1750. So can you guys like list any like big ideas that happened during this time to see if like it's a possible like question? Like I have like four possible questions in here. So someone says, if you support your claim with four documents out of five that you use, will they take points off if you fail to use with four? I think you should wait, stay after today and I'll understand. Uh I'll answer that. So Columbian Exchange, Age of Exploration, yeah, these are all like on the right track, right? So in the first one, one of them is like the Mongol Empire, like what they did. There's also like maritime trade, there's Columbian exchange, like the land-based empires. You could see all of these potentially in the LEQ. And then someone said, what range do you think is the easiest? I think it is typically I would recommend number two or number three because they are from more recent time periods. So number two, we can see it's from like 1450 to 1750 or 1750 to 1900. There's like questions about the Industrial Revolution, right? The revolutions in general, imperialism. I think that is like one of the easier ones. I think more than half of the people I know, yeah, prefer number three because I'm not sure if it's guaranteed, but it is going to be the latest one, and it is typically 1900 onward. All the practice tests that I've seen have had 1900 onwards, so that could be like the global wars, right? Decolonization, technological advancements, all of these could be asked about. And then the LEQ rubric, the context, just like the DBQ, always start with the context, right? All right, so let's take a look at this prompt. We're going to be playing another context game. So evaluate the extent to which these political revolutions have impacted Enlightenment ideas. So that's the prompt, right? Political revolutions, Enlightenment ideas. Yeah, I like that. I see a lot of people saying one. I agree with that because one is like I talk about you like it's talking about what the Enlightenment is, and then it's talking it like sort of leads into the thesis. I think if you can get your context to lead into the thesis, then it will be very strong. And then two, it just states like a fact of so two, it might be a little bit of a stretch if you write something like that, but I think it likely won't get the point. Okay. And then the thesis is since we don't need as many pieces of evidence as a DBQ, right? We can just use like a simpler format, a four paragraph format is what I recommend. And this means that our thesis will also be shorter. You're actually only required to use two pieces of evidence for the evidence point, but you'll see later why I recommend four. So okay, so the thesis format I would recommend is prompt is the prompt was something was very significant because of A and then because of B. So let's take a look at this prompt. Evaluate the extent to which political revolutions that prompt, right? My thesis, it doesn't have to be long, right? It's just in the period 1750 to 1900, Enlightenment ideas were very important in both the American Revolution and the Haitian Revolution. So what I'm doing is I'm just making a claim talking about the significance of something, and that is one of the easiest ways, you'll just get a point on the exam. Right? And then evidence here, right? I said you only need to use two pieces of evidence. Make sure you have like your own analysis about how it relates back to the prompt. So you may be wondering what may be considered as evidence. So if you know like specific facts or about what happened then, like if you can mention Columbian exchange, for example, if you can just put that out, like a vocab term, or like what a certain person did, right? If you can talk about how let's see, what's an example of that? How like one person's like did like started a revolution or something like Toussaint, like the overture in Haiti. You could talk about what he did. Like that is what works as evidence, pretty much just like a historical fact or something that occurred. Yeah, and then analysis, it is very similar to the DBQ, just one sentence where you talk about the evidence, the implications, and you write your own analysis to it. Yeah. And then here's an example evidence plus analysis. I'll read this for you guys. One famous Enlightenment thinker during the American Revolution was Thomas Paine. So that is like a certain historical figure, right? And I talk about in this pamphlet, he highlighted the need for American independence. Prime example of this, and then this is the actual analysis. The idea of self-determination is what led to the overall success of the American Revolution. So I'm like tying it back to the prompt and then that and the thesis, which is why this is a very strong example of evidence. Yeah. And then the complexity point here, the reason why I said you guys should use four pieces of evidence is because the one of the since there's no documents, right? We can't do force sourcing or seven using all seven documents. The easiest way to get the complexity point in this case is to just explain how multiple pieces of evidence, right? And in this case is four. Like I recommend you try to aim for five in case one doesn't work well, but four is enough to get the complexity point. Yeah. And even if you write like just two paragraphs, right? Your context and your thesis, and then you have like one main point with two pieces of evidence, and you do those two pieces of evidence well, you can easily just get 5 out of 6 points. But if you want the 6 out of 6, you just need to put in a little bit more effort and then add like one more body paragraph. Yeah. And then here is like another example of an LEQ prompt, like the Mongol expansion and how it affected Eurasia. All right. So now I'll go on to the last part, the SAQs. The SAQs you will have, it is right after, like, it's in the same time period, like where you do the multiple choice. You'll have 40 minutes to do them. There's going to be three questions with three parts each. So that should average around 13 minutes per question. And then you must do questions one and two, but you can choose between questions three and four. So they don't actually give you a general rubric for it. Like they just tell you this, right? Each point is independent. So it's either you get the point or you don't. And then it just says, like, it's pretty much just interpretation of the graders, right? If the biggest thing about this is strong writing skills. If you can argue for a certain point, then you will likely get the point. Unless it is like an identified question and you just do it wrong. All right. So here is one SAQ. This was from, I think it was 2023 when I did it. It is, so yeah, the first SAQ, number one is required because this will be a secondary source, which means it is from a historian that is not from the time that the event actually occurred, right? So we can see he's talking about the fall of empires, but it is written in 2003 from a historian. Right. And then some of the questions will likely look something like this, right? The first question will likely be an identify question. And especially for the secondary source, it'll likely I ask you to identify the argument or the claim of the author. And then question two, it could either be an identify or an explain. In this case, it was actually an explain questions. And then question three is typically an explain question. Right. So here's how I'd recommend you do the identify question. You can do it in just one sentence, or you can just say the point of view is so and so. But what I'd recommend you do is you say the author's point of view is so and so because he mentioned another thing, right? So in the I might not have had time to show you guys the SAQ, but the author's point of view in the first paragraph is that the reason why empires fell is very clear, right? Like there's signs of it, and then he talks about how the previous empires have all fallen due to like a common theme of like instability. I think the reason why this works is that the first part, like the identification part, is clear, and then the second part is like, let's say you actually did it wrong, right? You didn't actually identify what is correct. You can easily recover for that by just adding one extra sentence. All right. And then explain questions. I'd recommend the T method, which I'm sure a few of you have probably heard about. T stands for thesis, like you restate the prompt, you make a claim, evidence, you provide evidence from the document, and then their analysis is you talk about how it relates back to the prompt. So I'll go more in depth of that into a later slide. Yeah. And then your second SAQ will likely be something like a primary source, right? You'll be drawing, it will likely be a drawing or a speech from a time period of when an event actually occurred. So we can see that this one is from the late 14th century, Ibn Battuta, an Arab scholar's writing. We know it was from actually from that time period. So the questions are also very similar to SAQ number one. It will ask you to identify question. Question two is a toss-up. And as we can see in this one, it's actually an identify one. And then question three is going to be an explain one usually. Right. And then question three or four is the one that you have to choose between. The reason why is because it's not a stimulus-based question. Question three will be we'll have a prompt that is an earlier time period than question four, and I'm pretty sure they will always be from different time periods. So I have this example prompt that you potentially might see. So this one is explain one way European colonialism affected indigenous peoples in the Americas from 1450 to 1750. So I'll actually be showing you guys how to actually do the explain questions with the T method. So here the T, my thesis would be one way European colonialism affected indigenous was through the spread of diseases, right? I'm making a point there, and then that is like the thesis of my idea. And then the evidence for that is like smallpox. Smallpox was a very infectious disease which the natives had no immunity against. That could and that's providing a piece of evidence which supports my thesis. And then my analysis is I'm talking about how, since the natives had no immunity against the disease, their numbers shrunk and then they were unable to resist European colonization. So I'm talking about how the Europeans affected the indigenous people and an implication of that effect. And that is a very easy way of how you'll get the point. Right. And then I have something from a former student. Okay, we don't have to go over that, but I think we can just end it off from here. Bakewind, do you have any other things you'd like to add, take over?
Not really. I think you covered it all. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so we can just end it off then.
And if anybody has any questions, I can allow people to unmute and ask them. If there's any questions that went unanswered, we will stay here and answer them.
Okay, I see one of you guys said your question was, let's say you support your claim with four documents out of five that you use. Wait, when you say that, do you mean like you're using five documents to support your claim, or you're using four documents to support your claim? Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I recommend you use like you try to aim for five, even if that one doesn't work, right? You still have four that do work, right? And then the way to get the point is you have at least four that work with it. And then once you have those four that work, you'll be given the point. So even if you have one document you did completely wrong, you'll still be able to get the points. They won't take points off for a wrong document. They can only give points for doing something the right way. So I hope that answers your question. What would you recommend doing to study? Okay, so I think that is, oh, Baquin, what do you think about that?
For studying, one thing that I did want to add on is uh not like content wise, but you should probably do a ton of, well, not like just do as much as you want, but probably do a bunch of MCQ questions because on the exam I did run into um, several questions, probably more than 10 that I've actually like done very similar before, and I think used nearly the same stimuli. So if you do a lot of MCQ, I'm pretty sure that would help a lot for um, yeah, for doing the ones when you get onto the exam.
Yeah, and then also I want to add on, I use this one website, like when I studied for it, it has a lot of multiple choice questions on it. I'll link this in chat. It's called apstudy.net. It has multiple choice questions from a lot of different for a lot of different exams, not just AP World, if you want to use that in the future. And I think those questions are like pretty accurate. All right, any more other questions? When's the last day we can? Oh, you can you if you guys want to, you guys can send them like whenever you want. If send them like if you guys can send them in like a week, I'll still respond to them. I'll try to respond to them. Yeah.